So today we're talking about time blocking and our energy and our attention span. There is a little bit of, we're going to get a little bit neuroscience-y here today, just because there is a lot of evidence and science behind why the collective researchers are finding that multitasking, as much as we have glorified it and glorified it and glorified it, multitasking isn't actually as efficient as or productive as we have been led to believe, or as we have believed. So there is research that says single tasking, so the opposite of multitasking, single tasking, focusing on that one task at a time, can make you up to 80% more productive than splitting your attention across multiple tasks. And obviously there are things that come up in work and life where you kind of have to be across different things. So we aren't talking about those situations that require that as anomaly situations, but we are simply talking about a better way to find on an individual level to help you focus a little bit better, whether your mind is distracted or whether it's in the habit of picking up your phone, even if you don't really want to do anything with it. It can just help you actually get things done, especially when you have those moments where you just feel human, totally human, and distracted in those moments. So to start with, we're covering, there's a little bit of theory, but it's fun. So cognitive load theory. So in short, cognitive load theory is covers where the working memory is small, so the memory when we're working is small, long-term memory is large, and the learning, so whether we're learning or taking in information, the learning occurs when the information is transferred from working to long-term memory. However, if the working memory, so the small memory, is overloaded, this transfer gets blocked, meaning that not much learning can take place. So if you consider at university or even at high school, they have different subjects broken up by different periods, right? There's obviously there's a lot of different reasons why they would have done it that way, purely because teachers teach one thing and specialize in one thing, but it's also because it means that we're focusing on one subject or one topic at a time. So if you've ever had to cram for finals or anything like that, and you have 4 subjects to study for, you likely would have chosen one at a time just by default, because you just need to focus on one at a time. So that's cognitive load theory, which goes directly into split attention effect. So this will get practical, I promise. But split attention effect is when an individual, so a student or an individual in a workplace, has to refer to 2 or more different sources of information simultaneously. And this creates an extra load on their brain, as switching between tasks takes extra time, effort, and energy. So what that basically means is if you've ever been in a scenario, I know I have, you're working on something in the office or at a home office, wherever it is, but you're working on something and the phone rings and it's a work call. So there's nothing wrong with the phone ringing, but you kind of have this moment of, oh, damn it, now I have to answer the phone. And you kind of break your focus, and that takes energy. And then whatever the phone call is about, you then have to have your energy on synthesizing the information and a response if it's needed when that comes through. And then you hang up the phone and you either need to action whatever came out of the phone call or turn back to the task that you were on, and you kind of feel a little bit more scattered again. It takes you a bit to get back into it. Maybe you get up and make a cup of tea or coffee because you're like, no, this is hard again. That's split attention effect in a practical sense. So enter time blocking. And I really like time blocking, especially when I feel a little distracted or a little wired mentally, especially mentally, because if I'm trying to think of, or my brain rather, not so much me, but if my brain is trying to think of solutions for different things or trying to make sure it remembers a whole lot of different things, Time blocking is really helpful. It's the same reason why writing down a list of your things to do before bed is really helpful, because it means that your brain can switch off because it knows that the information is written down somewhere. It doesn't have to hold on to it. So time blocking, I have a little bit, I'm just going to read directly from here. So with time blocking, so there's different ways to do time blocking. We're not talking about doing time blocking where it has to be perfection. This is about finding a way that it works for you, because we are all very different. We all function very differently. Our lives are very different. Even your shifts or your work flows throughout your day are very different as well. So this is about making sure it works for you. So when we talk about it, know that this is just with that general framework. So research has come out to support 90-minute blocks. And the reason for this specific amount of time is our brain takes up a lot of energy. So bumping information back and forth between the nerve cells and depleting our sodium-potassium ratios. So that's why things like certain salts and like bananas are very good, because they keep our energy there, our focus, especially when we're doing brain work. But science has proven that our brain can last for 90 minutes at optimal high frequency levels before losing steam, after which it needs a roughly 20-minute break. So that's why you might have heard of, like, you have to get up from your desk every 90 minutes and sort of take a walk or go make a cup of tea or whatever it is, or have a little bit of a stretch, just because it's that brain break. So this pattern of 90 minutes on, 20 minutes off is based on something called the basic rest activity cycle. So it also exists during sleep and outside of sleep. So it's a cyclical wave. It's the ultradian rhythm. So we have activity, and then we have for like the 90 minutes, and then we have the rest in the trough for 20, and then we have a peak at the 90, and then the rest, and so on and so forth, like that. However, it is generally accepted that blocking every single thing that we do into 90 minutes isn't practical for real life humans. But it also goes into the whole workload element. So there's also the element where when we set ourselves an allocated amount of time to complete a task, we will take that time to complete the task. When we shorten that time, most of the time, obviously extraneous circumstances don't apply, but most of the time we can do that task in, like, whether we shorten the time to an hour or we allow 2 hours for it, our brains and the way we work allows that time to complete the task. So it kind of works itself around that, which is just a funny thing that our brain does. And again, this is for normal tasks, not for the big stressful projects where you're working really hard and it takes longer than you expect. So this is on a standard level that we're talking about. So with time blocking, we're not talking about necessarily making it 90 minutes for you every single time. If that works for something, great. But if it doesn't, that's the point of 90 minutes isn't the point really. But the reason that we're talking about time blocking in these sessions particularly is because there is a mindfulness element of it. There is a focus element, which is mindfulness, where when we say we set a timer on our phone, it can be a really useful way to do time blocking, is set the timer. Our brain is then able to accept the fact that, oh, the timer will go off. I don't need to keep checking the time and wondering if I've gone over the 90, say it's 90 minutes. Our brain knows that there's a timer that will alert us. And then what happens from there is our brain can go, oh, okay, well, if I can check my emails, or if I can check my Facebook feed in 90 minutes time, I guess I can focus on what we're wanting to focus on here and now, right? So it's not tricking your brain, it's a compromise with your brain to say, hey, you can be as distracted in that 20 minutes as you want. There is a timer though. So we're setting a timer. You're going to be alerted. So you may as well make the use of this time block that we're working in to actually get stuff done. So it makes it a lot easier to be more present. Which is why when we worked with practices like breathing, we generally work with a set amount of time, or when we've done the breathing backwards, the counting backwards, with the breath, so 1 count per breath, the reason we do that is because, say it's 10 breaths, our brain can go, oh, I know there's an end point to this. It's not indefinite. I'm going to survive this amount of time, so I can just be with the breath a little easier, because at the end I can go as far and wide as I want. So it's just a little way of working with the brain and helping to practice focus, practice presence, but also encourage presence within us, which is why I feel like this is a really useful mindfulness activity rather than just a productivity hack, if you will. So it could be things like when you take a break, that could be the time block time as well. So instead of going, oh, I'll just go make a cup of tea and then I'll come back, allow time to, like, how much time you need to make a cup of tea, but maybe add a little bit extra, so that way when the reminder goes off, there's just this time to relax, rather than this indefinite time of, oh, however long it takes to make my cup of tea and then I might have a chat and whatever. None of these things are necessarily negative, but it can help with focus to come back to the job at hand as well. It's something that works really well, I've found, with athletes when they have to go off court in the middle of play and then be ready to switch on and come back on. It's the same concept as well. So when you're in the work environment or in your work day, it works really well because you are still having break time, which is definitely important, but it makes it a bit easier to come back into the focus after the fact. So there's different ways that you can use time blocking. I'm not here to tell you exactly which way you should function your day, because obviously that depends on the demands that you have in your position or how your team works or all of those different things, right? But this is just more about what you can do on a personal level. So some people will have a time block where they check their emails first, and then they'll time block from there, and they won't check their emails again until after the first time block. So they'll use the time in between to check emails rather than during that time. And that can just help with, again, the focus on, oh, I'm just working on this. And even if it's a 20-minute time block, which is a really good starting point because it doesn't feel too big. It doesn't feel like forever and ever when it's only 20 minutes versus 90 minutes. 90 minutes is a very long time. Or can feel like a very long time. So it's looking at areas in your day that you can do this, but also I want to bring in and invite you to bring in areas in your day that you can set that reminder to have your breathing time blocks, because again, that breath is going to, and we cover this pretty much every week, that breath is going to really help level out your nervous system and really just help give your brain some space outside of the productivity, because we're not designed to be productive forever and ever and ever, which is why the 90 minutes is there as well, because in that cyclical nature, we're not designed to be productive on one thing for longer than 90 minutes, generally speaking. So looking at, and this is part of the activity and it's going to be very personal to each of you, so I can only really guide you through it, but looking at your day, so make it a standard work day, or if you feel like something else in your outside of work time is needing attention to sort of focus on time blocking, you can look at that as well. I'll just refer to the work day because we're in that context. But looking at your standard work day and just looking at the areas, you don't have to time block everything. Again, I understand that you have your team to work with. You might have to answer phone calls and things like that, or have impromptu conversations or meetings. That's definitely something that plays a role in how life, especially work life, just shows up, and that is okay. But hence the benefit of having those breathing breaks, because it means that you can just sort of be with those moments that show up that aren't in your plan. So looking at your general work day or your general day, and maybe grabbing your piece of paper and your pen, and just, you can go into this with as much depth as you like, especially afterwards, but or sit with this, but just sort of writing down the first few initial things that come to mind that you do in your day that you could time block, where you have the power to, right? So if there's a project that you're working on, you might make it real-time practicality on how you might lay out your use of focus and energy and productivity on that project. At the moment, it's all very contextual. So maybe just write down initially going, okay, well, these are the things that I can time block. This is how I can break down my day, so that things don't feel so overwhelming and big, because when we break things down into identifiable little pieces, we can go like, oh, I can do that. That part's easy, rather than looking at it as a whole and going, oh my God, I have to get through this whole day. When you think about your day now, we always break it down to, we arrive at work, and then hopefully at some point you have a break mid-morning, like a tea break or something. And then there's the space between that and lunch. And then the space between that and your next cup of tea or coffee or whatever it is. And then the space between that and going home. So we already break our day down. Generally, most of us will already break our day down unconsciously anyway. So this is looking at your tasks, especially the ones that feel big and overwhelming. How can you break them down and then time block them out? So, for example, this is on a very small scale because it's not over a whole day. For example, for me to prepare for this session, even though I knew what I was talking about, I knew the data was there, everything like that, there was a moment where I was spending time and I broke it down. So time blocking is breaking it down into the actionable items, or the items, what they are, but then also blocking out the time that you need. So I spend the time and go, okay, generally speaking, it should take, I'm just going to use numbers just for the sake of having numbers, but it should take, say, 30 minutes to do the research. So make sure that I've got all the research I need, all the accurate statistics and numbers, especially for this one, because we did get into those theories, all the actual descriptions of those theories, so that I don't freeze and then forget in the moment. So I'll spend 30 minutes, say, doing that research, making sure that I've got my I's dotted, T's crossed as far as the information I'm actually sharing. And then if I finish earlier than that 30 minutes, great. But if I have all the information within that 30 minutes, then my focus is there. And that's done. And then it's like, okay, well, the next 15 minutes or this next period of time, I'm just gonna put my phone to the side, maybe set the timer. And obviously this all depends on whether you're done by that time or not as well. That's one of those outside elements that you can discern for yourself. But I'll set the timer for, say, 15 minutes, and I'll just lay out how I want to present it. What's the most useful way for this information to be shared for you guys? And then I'll lay it out. However, I like pen and paper, obviously, but you can do it like on screen, whatever works for you. But just having that time where I'm like, okay, this is my project that I'm working on, I'll lay that out. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, if I'm done laying it out, or if I'm done before it, I can go, okay, cool. That's what I'm doing. I'm just going to spend, it won't take that long to read through, but I'm just going to spend the next 10 minutes reading through, making any little bits of notes that I want to make sure that I cover off. And then I'm done. So time blocking can be that simple. It doesn't have to be as militant and rigid as that whole 90-minute piece sounds. So you've got your list of things that you could time block, and the next thing you can do is just allocate them. Don't worry about how it all adds up in the day for the moment, but just allocate them a time that you might think that you'd normally be able to get them done in. Roughly speaking, because as you just heard, it will change depending on how you actually go with it. And especially you might find the more that you actually focus and allow yourself to focus on it by time blocking, it actually could happen quicker. Or there's also things that crop up that we aren't aware of. So going through your emails, you can't set a time limit on that because you don't know what's going to show up in your emails that you have to then deal with, or that you have to then address or cover off on. So just give yourself each of those items a rough time amount. And if it feels like the time amount is bigger than 90 minutes, that's your indication to break it up. As far as a task that goes, break it up into smaller pieces within that project or that task. So with any of the videos that I do, there is the element of the same thing, of research or planning, that I'm like, okay, well, I've got to sit there and decide on my topic, and I've got to write down what I want to share about it. And then what I want to share about it might bring up a need for research, because I want to share something that isn't currently in my brain, but I know has been there once. And then there's these smaller pieces, rather than going, oh, I just have to film some videos. Because when we try to bring things in and just say, oh, it's just this, that's when it usually takes a bit longer than we plan, because just this also involves these other things. So let yourself have that little time limit, or rough time guesstimate on each of those tasks. And then for the last little thing, because this is where you'll then explore and practice if you feel to, maybe on Monday having the reminder to set the timers for each of those things. Have that piece of paper or whatever you're writing it down on right in front of the desk there, so that you can come back to it on Monday and be like, oh, hey, oh, that's right, we were looking at that. Okay, well, yeah, this works for this day. I'm going to set a time limit. I'm going to set that timer on my phone, and then I'm going to leave it there, trust that the timer will tell me when time is up, and I'm just going to work on that. So what I want you to do from here, because this is really important as well, and it helps with efficiency, productivity, and focus, as we already know, is to inject breathing breaks into those little slots of rest, or even in between each at every 90-ish minutes. And that sounds like a lot, but when you're working on something, but especially when you do start to, especially if you've had issues with focus before, or you may already be super productive, but this may just help clean it up mentally for you. So it's not to say that you are unproductive now, or that there is an issue now. It's just helping to clean up the mental space and the mental clutter. So when we start to do that, though, when we start to practice that, we can feel really driven because we're getting stuff done, but it's also really important because when we're on that roll, we need to pause and make sure we breathe. So inject breathing breaks. And you can play with this rough schedule of your day beyond just now, but that's the general framework of time blocking and the why we do it. It's not just so you can be more productive and efficient, but it is for that. But it is for your mindfulness, for your mental state, especially when you feel stressed and overwhelmed. It can help just bring things in a little, where you get a little bit more clarity and a little bit more focus.